to use for good purpose. Anyway, so that's the there's the real SDG 8.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we are really pressed for time, but everyone was so, the reports were so interesting. I thought that it would be helpful to hear everyone out as much as we could. But what we're going to have to do now is kind of take these last 15 minutes and consolidate the last two sections. So if we could take some time and think about your questions that you'd like to ask, but do it in the context of the three things that we talked about at the beginning: policy, challenges and opportunities, and models, right? Because those would be the action items. Those would turn into the action items that we would then take back to the NGO community and the member states. So if you can frame your discussion and questions to one another, either to others who are in the room or to in response to the presentations that you heard, if we can talk about policy, challenges and opportunities, and models. And would anyone like to start? Does anyone have a question? Yes, sir. And please introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
I'm Andrew Shepherd. I'm from the Overseas Development Institute in London, and we're about to launch on Monday a chronic poverty report on growth at a side event here in the Japan Center, Monday, 9 o'clock. And I think it reports on research which I think would support quite a lot of what's been said this afternoon. The basic theme of the report is that if you want to escape poverty and stay out of poverty, you depend on what we've called growth from below rather than growth from above. Growth from below is small-scale investments, often informal, often smallholder agriculture, the rural non-farm economy, migration to your local town, whatever. Growth from above is larger scale, more formal investment. Sometimes growth from above does help to reduce poverty. So labor-intensive manufacturing, the garments industries, leather making, and so on, these can provide jobs and kind of direct inputs into poverty reduction, if you like. But even in countries like Cambodia or Bangladesh, where you have that growth from above and it's labor-intensive manufacturing, you still find most people escaping poverty through growth from below. So I thought the examples from Mexico on the garbage picking and kind of developing that and so on were exactly the kind of measures which are necessary to support growth from below. And I think a lot of NGOs get involved in one aspect or another of supporting growth from below. So that's the message of the, do come along to the side event.
When is that?
It's Monday morning, 9 o'clock, Japan Society.
Oh, at the Japan Society.
Yeah.
I think growth from below is a really...
So the good examples in the tourism sector were also really about growth from below. It's not the big hotels and so on which are going to lead to poverty reduction. It's the ancillary enterprises, the arts and crafts, the retail, trade, and so on and so forth. And you can apply the model in.
And in relation to my presentation, that is what happens when investors spend their money rather than invest it.
Maybe, yeah. I think we need to make the connection.
But maybe we need to scale it up somehow, small scale. I mean, how do you have enough impact when it's so small?
Finance is big.
Well, I'm just reporting research findings about how people actually escape poverty. And it's not so much through the big scale of investments, it's through these small scales of investment. Which is not to say that they're going to solve it, they're going to solve all problems, but that is how people are escaping at the moment, and then staying out of poverty. You need to do lots of other things as well to keep people from falling back into poverty.
Sure.
Can I also feedback on that?
Mm-hmm.
I like what you mentioned. I have another example of a world record breaker in reducing poverty, which is Bhutan. And they did it not in that sense, but by eliminating GDP as a measure of progress 30 years ago. they took another approach and they went for cross-national happiness, and it sounds woolly and hippie, whatever, but it's not, because it's a very detailed indicators, targets, whole set of parameters. And the World Bank is telling that Bhutan is a record breaker in reducing poverty. So there are different ways of achieving poverty reduction, and that's a very good one. I like it, but at the same time, if you talk about scaling up, I think there's a big role for governments to play.
Oh yeah.
And that's an example. Like Bhutan has done it, New Zealand is trying it, Scotland is experimenting with the well-being economy. So both are necessary. I'm not saying anything against you.
You might find that the Bhutan growth, a lot of it is growth from below. That
Probably,
the government
yeah.
has provided
Probably.
sort of enabling.
Exactly. The
enabling
government
environment.
enables the growth from below, but that government
I
first
don't
needs
know
to
that.
enable it. So
All of the discussion so far seems to be mirroring a lot of what came out as we were drafting the document. I'm interested to know if there is anyone in the room who took a different position or holds a different position, who has questions about scale and impact, and whether or not growth from below goes far enough. Is there anyone in the room who has a different take?
Hi, I'm Karina, and I'm doing a master in public health, interested in growth. I don't know anything about economics, but what I understand is that knowing about community-based scientists and the knowledge that they have to bring up ideas and how the growth can be compared to a biological system, and we cannot overshoot. We need to let the politicians know in different ways, the way they learn, that some patterns of productions are not sustainable. And the goal here is to make us sustain the way we are living and achieve health and well-being for each human being that is living in this area. So I don't know what will be the strategy, but basing our knowledge in science is excellent, and also communicate that science to make policy.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Sorry to talk so much. I'm sometimes struck by how we are kind of us versus them. You know, there's this bad government side and the, you know, the kind of more ethical civil society side, and that's the reality. But we're talking about collaboration all the time in the SDGs. And I mean, governments are supposed to, their primary service is to help people, and how did they come to be so dysfunctional? And I mean, is there a way to change the way we speak about to them in a more collaborative way, which is more persuasive? Are there entry points, you know, to make a better case by being more persuasive? Is my question. The governance problem.
One of the things that we found when we were doing the work is that the member states are big on growth from above. They're big on the economic output. The growth is 8.1 is very important. But when you talk about the organizations, NGOs, civil society, those that serve the local population, the most vulnerable places, people in the places where they live, it's a very different picture. And so how do you find an intersection between the agenda of the member states and the agenda of the NGO and civil society? And are they that far apart? Are there places where they can come together?
We talk about balancing growth from above with growth from below in policy initiatives. I mean, as you say, most governments support growth from above rather than growth from below, but get a balance. So don't discount the growth from above. It can be good, but then I think you get into the environmental debate about what is sustainable. And you know, that's obviously a massive ongoing debate, which is totally unresolved.
Another phrase you could use for the same differences that between driven growth and cultured growth. Be a way to think about the same difference, even though those are both vague concepts, but I think they tap into something like what you're talking about.
The cultured one being more organic, like
being more organic,
yogurt.
being opportunistic, rather than compelled. You know, like rather than stimulating demand by using manipulative advertising. You know, I mean, that's where an awful lot of the driven growth that we've experienced comes from. Where you don't have any choice in what you want. You're told what to want.
My name is Matt. I'm from the Economy for the Common Good. In a nutshell, we have a framework and indicator which, like the happiness index in Bhutan, measures economic growth in a different way. It's just a little bit less fluffy and hippie. And we lobby local authorities, governments, the United Nations to adapt a new indicator that actually measures what matters. We need to start measuring what the economy actually should do for us directly, rather than hunting and constantly striving to go for more financial growth as a means to then give us what we need as people. We think that if we go for GDP, if we go for profit, for return on investment, if we have the money, with the money we can solve our issues. But we need to actually start measuring what it is that we need as human beings, what makes us happy, what is healthy for us, what is ethical, what is sustainable. Those are the things that matter, and that needs to come together in a framework, in an indicator, and that needs to become the very goal of the economy. And then we can be agnostic about, does that come with financial growth or not? Because if we achieve what we want for society, it doesn't matter if the money goes up or down or left or right. We achieve for society what we want to achieve for society.
I'm kind of in, and this is kind of coming off of what you just mentioned earlier, where there's this sort of us versus them in growth from above, growth from below, or growth from below can only go so far without the explicit support of state bodies and government agencies to really push that to a national scale. Then growth from above never quite percolates down to the grassroots ground level. And there's this like nebulous middle section. And what I'm kind of intrigued by is a movement in the private sector among large investment companies and financial institutions, whereby it's not perfect and it's still new and emerging, but it's taking these investment models, investment strategies, and how to maximize the impact of investment, but totally within a social economic benefit context. And there are organizations that are like this that work entirely in the private sector, but are operate within a completely social impact model. And I'm very intrigued in watching this rise of the private sector and trying to bridge that growth from above, growth from below, and be that sort of middle coupling. And from my experience in actually speaking with a lot of these organizations, there is a willingness and an openness for civil society organizations to come forth and present problems and present those metrics and the findings in a way that these institutions are not yet developed the capacity to measure impact. And I think maybe perhaps some of the conversation, instead of us trying to say, well, we've got to get government on our side, we've got to get the private sector to do what we want, is perhaps taking a step back and reevaluating whether our judgments of these institutions are actually valid anymore. There is an emergence within these other agencies in the government and the private sector and business and industry to try to bridge that gap and try to be more responsive. And I've been trying to listen throughout the panels so far in the past couple of days as to how civil society organizations are addressing this language of, is it still a hostile relationship, or is there a way we can move beyond that?
I'll just add to that, I completely agree. There are not only in civil society the voices who would like to shift to a more sustainable, ethical way in the economy, but also in the private sector, very much so, and also in the investment world. Impact investing has grown immensely lately, but where there seems to be still a roadblock is with government and the United Nations, with those bureaucratic institutions which are outside of civil society and outside of the private sector, which are still kind of guarding the status quo.
One of the things there is that you don't often see, but over the years, if you're paying attention, you notice that it's really finance that's behind both. That finance controls the levers of government and social institutions as well. That you have the financial advisors that you have to consult before you initiate any project. And they're a pretty tight-knit bunch. Well, as I'm saying, they're a pretty tight-knit bunch. I guess from experience of finding the OECD having its fingers in all sorts of controlling situations, you know, they're exercising. They have the power, and they're exercising their true belief as to what is best for mankind, which is their greed, and they're not. I think there's lots of people in that world ready to acknowledge that they may have made a mistake, but and that's why I'm hopeful.
Just a quick last thought on that. Like Carlos said, the economy for the common good is a grassroots movement. There are companies out there, there are local authorities out there who already measure something else than profit. There are 650 companies who produce a common good balance sheet in addition to the financial balance sheet. Like Carlos said, if they don't embrace this, leaving no one behind, then maybe we need to leave those organizations behind and do it ourselves.
Yeah. I would like to add that when we talk about, we have to start to talk about to be competitive, no, in the company sector, in the private sector. We have to start to arise with the concept to be competent, because if we are competitive, someone is going to win and the rest is going to lose. So we have to be competent because it's applied to people and for companies. The thing that I want to say inside this is that from my perspective, companies have to learn, and I understand that you are from NGOs, but I would like to tell you that maybe you can tell to the companies that they have to learn that they don't have to present their results only to their shareholders, but they have to understand that they are part of a global life community, as you say. So they are not alone. They are not part. In that way, they have to discover their inner purpose of. And as an NGO, you can help them to align that purpose to the SDG, to promote inclusion, equality, and put people at the center.
I'm gonna ask you to stop right there 1 second, because we are now down to like 2 minutes before we have to leave, and of course, you know, the afternoon discussion is about SDG 8, so we don't want to miss that, and I have to sit in the UN NGO official chair in case we're asked to speak on it. So
two ideas.
Okay.
Very quickly.
Very quickly.
Companies are developing now social systems. This is something new, but now they are open to develop these social systems in order to track progress in this whole agenda. And finally, the financial sector are looking for more companies that have the environmental, social, and governance. You can be part of that. You have the expertise. Companies doesn't know how to keep in dialogue with all the stakeholders, but you can provide information, research, help them to be part of this agenda.
Thank you very much. The only thing I was going to ask, and in closing, is One, there is a sign-in sheet somewhere in this room, thank you. And secondly, how we might go about working together, and I'll follow up with that list, translating all of what we've heard. Those of you who took notes, please share them, so that we can kind of translate this into a living document that we can then pursue this agenda further within the NGO community and around civil society, and hopefully then move to the member states to address both the call to action that was in the paper, as well as any innovation models and policy issues that come out of this discussion. I thank you all for coming and taking your time. I apologize for the technical difficulty we had in the beginning, but thank you so much for taking your time to come and sharing your expertise and information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ava.
Thank you, Jesse. We'll have to do it again.
So I was wondering who was going to sit in that chair.
Would people be willing to share their PowerPoints with the other groups, those of you who contributed them? Okay, sure.
Before you share the PowerPoint, thank you. I noticed I had like saved the last version, so there was still, especially there was a picture of the cover of the report, which was
Okay, well just send me the most recent
yeah. So
version,
please
and then
wait
we'll share
for.
that.
I'll do that today. But
Okay.
yeah.
Perfect, all right.
By the way, it's a very nice dress.